All right, we are connected for the Friday edition of the Morning Check-In, and as always, looking forward to connecting and sharing my 2 cents on a variety of subject matter. And right now, in my opinion, it's the petrodollar, which is in front and center right now because of Saudi Arabia's record-breaking streak of delivering oil to the U.S. and all of the other oil developments that are taking place that's centered around maintaining dollar supremacy, and things are starting to come together a lot more clear and concise. And so I'm going to talk about that and a lot more. We got jobs data, we got pick whatever you want to talk about. What's it ever? It's just irrelevant because at the end of the day, it's this instrument here that matters most to you, I'm sure, because it is how we price our lives today and our future. And clearly, something's changing with the petrodollar. So I'm going to talk about that a lot more. But for those who are plugged in, appreciate you for blessing with your time and presence. Sorry about the tardiness, but always trying to maneuver and improve things for you guys on the back end. So grab a couple extra sound bites that add up to the stories that I'm going to connect to let you know what's happening. So we're going to talk about that and a lot more. So let me make sure I'm flowing on all cylinders. So feel free to share thoughts, ideas, and suggestions in the chat. And if we have any first time viewers, this is where you get a chance to let me know where you're watching from. And by do that in the comment section or the chat, depending on you watching the replay, where you're watching from, make sure that you subscribe, hit the bell, as well as drop a comment so your voice can be heard. And of course, I'm sure there's a boatload of subjects that interest you. So keep us up to date with what you're keeping your eyes on in the chat or in the comment section, and we'll go from there. And as always, I got to double check and make sure my mic is working. So for those who are plugged in, let me know if you can hear me, and then I'll get right into it. I got at least 10 tabs open, of which more than half is centered around the petrodollar narrative and why that is important, because we're going to be bombarded with all types of things come this fall. Geopolitics are bipartisan concerns, the Clarity Act, which is going to be postponed, you name it. So, and then someone says all municipal bonds will go down soon. No doubt. Anything denominated in a USD term is running the risk right now of becoming a non performing liability because, once again, interest rates are much lower than they need to be in order to really, I guess, try to, as Jerome Powell used to say, to conduct a soft landing, whatever that means. But okay, appreciate everybody for blessing with your presence. Let me just move right along. Want to get things going. So let's start with some primary headlines that caught my attention to start this off. And so also, congratulations for those that are patiently waiting and anticipating. We've had some interesting developments when it comes to gold and silver, which I think is more so related to the uncertainty in the global economy and in our local domestic issues that we're having here. And so with the Clarity Act being postponed, it looks like until after recess, clearly gold and silver cares nothing about clarity because we all know what is real, true, tried, and tested. But what's different about this is we almost touched $65 an ounce. And of course, look at gold. Gold is still trending upward overall to 43. And so we're well beyond those previous ceilings that were set. And so whenever a ceiling is, I guess, removed or placed up higher, it's an indication that something's happening behind the scenes. And of course, we won't hear about it until after the fact. But nevertheless, that's why I always say possession over price any day, because it's null and void for those who know what's really going down. But I do want to comment real quick on the ceiling that I talked about over the last several videos, and it had to do with what we're seeing here. So literally, it has been 30 days to the actual minute almost, where we haven't had a $60+ market close in 30 days. And so literally to see, right now we're seeing, as you can see on the screen here, we're seeing 63.32. That is something to not frown upon because it was literally 30 days of 5 rejections. So literally you got to go back to July 7th at this time when we were above 60 comfortably, and it was 61.90. And so we've had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 failed attempts at recovering above 60. So clearly the suppression and futures dumping was so strong that it worked for 30 days. Now we have to wait and see what happens over the next 30 days. heading into September. Now that Congress is closed, there's no more political jawboning that will take place. So it's free game on this administration needing to come up with some narrative surrounding a deal, which we heard nothing about the last 48 hours. And it's what be done by now if they were so eager to make a deal. So that's going to be another issue in of itself. But I digress. This is a interesting development here. So let's see if we can finish this week above 63. And then over the weekend, there's going to be more noise to take us into Monday. And it either go down or come up. But either way it go, hopefully over the last 30 days, you've taken an opportunity to acquire what you believe is true, tried, and tested. Okay, cool. Enough of that. That's kind of boring news now. Okay, so this is the next story of subject matter. Jobs data dense rate hike bet. So it says go hit 7-week high as weak U.S. jobs data dense rate hike bets. And so if jobs is an issue, that puts more pressure on the Fed to have to consider like, okay, are we concerned with inflation or is there our jobs or, where does our mandate come into all this? And so ultimately speaking, more of a pause for longer because they don't want to admit outright, that they are well behind the curve. So I don't expect some type of hike in September. No, chalk it up. And we'll just chug along. Things will take place. In the meantime, interest rates will remain because once they move next, whether up or down, it's going to be an ongoing thing. So, okay. But just to give you some data here. So I think yesterday somebody asked about the jobs data. I'm like, it doesn't matter. Good news is bad news. Bad news is good news. They're all fake. And so it's the great revision that I pay attention to. And of course, they've been revising down ever since Joe Biden. I bet you Trump won't say that. But anyway, it says U.S. job July non-farm payrolls negative 23,000 versus an expected 80,000 plus. So that's 100,000 job difference. That gap is so large, it doesn't make sense outside of the fact that all the jobs numbers have been suspect for quite some time now. And then it says UA rate futures cuts chances of September rate hike. Oh, you think. Silver, platinum, and palladium also head for weekly gains. Wow. Would you look at that? Reuters is telling us that silver, platinum, and palladium is doing their thing. Okay. Now, you might have come here for something a little bit different. And so this story here that I'm about to transition to now centered around the petrodollar because this is front and center right now. And so outside of the Strait of Hormuz being the primary choke point for the flowing of oil from that region, Iran clearly is winning that narrative and that conflict because things aren't flowing westward priced in dollars. It's obvious. Go check the graphs. You'll see tankers are flowing. They're flowing east. They're flowing everywhere else except the U.S. And there's no greater proof than the fact that Saudi Arabia, the U.S.'s numero uno oil energy partner in the Middle East, sent 0 barrels for the first time in 40 years. Now you got to ask yourself a question. If you're Saudis and you're not sending oil to your biggest partner, your ally, that means you're making $0 on the oil that did not get shipped. And so if you're not sending it that way, you're either not making money and need to close down shop, or you're sending it somewhere else. And more than likely, you're no longer needing to force people to pay you in dollars. And so it's this type of activity here that then gives a greater understanding as to why Venezuela is so important and why Israel's desire to become a oil hub is important as well. So we're witnessing the reshuffling of the petrodollar system. It will not come to an end. This instrument here will not go null and void overnight. It's just the world will require payment and other things. Hence the idea of the U.S. needing to lie to the American public more. And there's going to be more pressure that's going to be placed on our allies to not outright cut their acceptance of dollars from their finances. Okay. So what am I talking about? This story here, man. This is a story like no other. And then I'm going to let you know my thoughts on it and we'll go from there. So here is the story of the day that deserves front and cover type of attention because this is a unprecedented action in the midst of what is already considered to be a very volatile and questionable environment centered around U.S. dollar hegemony. And so let me just give you the nuts and bolts. It says Saudi crude oil shipments to U.S. plunged to 0. Decline followed disruptions to Persian Gulf oil flows tied to the U.S. U.S.-Iran war. And so to zero, we've never seen the word zero associated with Saudi Arabia since 1985 for an entire month. And so what's different from then to now is the fact is this will not just be a single month, in my opinion. This is going to be a more long drawn out process because Iran is not backing down. And unless the U.S. go into Iran and physically get involved with boots on the ground, it's going to be more jawboning from this administration and no real action coming from it. So therefore, Saudi Arabia is like, okay, we're not making money from you. Do we really need to just, be reliant upon you and your currency? No. And the reason I say that is because obviously Saudi Arabia knows that something's coming now, that Saudi Arabia will no longer be forced to ship because they can't ship. And they won't be shipping if they do in dollars solely. And so no wonder they are now establishing a Mecca trilateral defensive agreement with their other Middle Eastern neighbors. So that's a lot said in once, but it's all centered around the dollar. And so it says U.S. Saudi Arabian oil dropped to zero in July, the first time that has happened for the entire month since 1985, according to preliminary government data. It says Saudi oil exports have been disrupted for months as U.S.-Iran conflict all but shut down Persian Gulf flows. And it says last month, the U.S.-bound shipments of Kingdom's crude ground to a halt, according to the Department of Energy as of August 5th. It says it's significant decline given that the U.S. refiners were buying more than 800,000 barrels of Saudi oil a day earlier this year. So think about that. 800,000 barrels were purchased using our liabilities per day is down to zero. That's a shock of all shocks. And so let me give you a visual as to what that looks like. And so here on the screen, you can see that article summarized in a more picturesque form. And so Saudi oil imports hit zero. So literally let me just give you this graph here. So this is kind of what it looks like. And so the 4-week average of U.S. imports of Saudi oil was significantly high, as it said here, up to 800,000 a day. So imagine things started to pick up a little bit after oil started to flow based upon some narratives. It's open, it's closed, it's open, it's closed. But literally, we're witnessing the drop off completely where we get to a month where it says zero. That right there is not just say something to smile about. And what has happened beyond that, at the same time, oil stopped flowing to us from the Middle East, priced in the Brent USD price market. Venezuela came online. And so this is the reason why it was so important for the U.S. to use the cover of redeeming or freeing the Venezuelan people and the regime and this and that, whatever. And we ain't heard nothing about Maduro. Maduro been in cuffs supposedly for the last 8 months, but more than likely he's probably on an island somewhere, sold his country out, got a good payday. And so the U.S. now is in charge of Venezuelan oil at the same time. So either the U.S. knew that oil was going to be disrupted or they needed cover for the reason why oil would no longer flow this way freely and the world would not be forced to, going eastward, solely have to accept dollars. Because the U.S. can't bully every single nation in the Middle East and around entirely because we don't have the manpower, I don't think, to enforce our commands saying that you must take the dollar or else. Are we going to sanction you? Are we going to bomb you? Are we going to replace? Right. So everything is good comes to an end. And clearly to me, these are all signs of how the dollar structure is slowly but surely coming to an end. And what makes this different is that it's happening at a time where the U.S. can't afford to have this type of outright admission from the world stage that the petrodollar system is no longer de facto. That's the point. It's no longer just status quo when it comes to being forced to do business in U.S. liabilities. And so here's a video that just gives more insight as to why Venezuela was so important and why Venezuela is now supplying us, why Venezuela is now our biggest supplier of oil outside of what we got here. So let's listen to this real quick.
Dollar dominance is essential, and everything President Trump is doing here is, if you look, the new Venezuela is invoicing in dollars. They're coming back onto the dollar system. They've been sanctioned. They were not allowed to translate or to.
Okay, so let me narrate that. This is Scott Bessent last month, as it says here on CNBC, talking about how great of economy we have because now we have a new source of oil. And so he says the new Venezuela is coming back on the dollar system, i.e., they're now being forced to do everything through the dollar, reinforcing what is just being lost coming from the Middle East, i.e., through Saudi Arabia, through Iran, all that stuff. And so listen to this is more of a reason why the US does what it does when it comes to our dollar.
Transact in dollars, and now dollar the dollar is going to be the centerpiece of their trade.
The dollar is going to be the centerpiece of their trade, or you mean of our trade, because we're the ones overseeing it by putting a female puppet president there as like the leadership. Okay.
We're selling discounted oil to China and not getting.
They were selling discounted oil to China and not having to receive dollars in payment.
Dollars. We're seeing in the Iranian negotiations, the Iranians will be invoicing in dollars.
So that's where he is outright, mistaken or want us to be mistaken. They're working with Iran to make sure that Iran is invoicing, will start invoicing their oil in dollars, which means that they are not already doing that, which is why the U.S. is literally so oppressed to make sure that Iran doesn't develop a nuclear weapon. Right. They're not there. They haven't been invoicing in USD for quite some time, not only because of sanctions, but then again, why would a nation who's under extreme sanctions for so many years still cooperate with their oppressors by accepting that their oppressor's currency when they got their own currency and other things? Okay.
Everything we are doing is pushing the dollar back. It's never left as the centerpiece for the global currency system, but we're reinforcing it.
Everything we're doing is to push, but it hasn't left. We're reinforcing the dollar. Okay, really.
Anticipate when the Russia-Ukraine conflict ends, that Russia will want to come back in the dollar system because, again.
So once Russia and Ukraine ends, do you actually think Putin's going to want to come back into the dollar system, the same dollar system that's sanctioning him now and all of his oligarchy type buddies? You think they're going to want to still accept that currency? Okay, we'll see.
Again, the dollar, it's our liquidity, it's our capital markets, it's the depth and breadth. Everyone wants to be here. And I think many times.
Everybody wants to be a part of that. Okay.
The great thing about the United States is we course correct when we go too far one way or the other. And I think we should not be shy about flexing where we have advantages, and where we have advantages, share with our allies and push back on those who are not aligned with us. Dollar dominance.
Push back on those who are not aligned with us. And so this is where we get into the idea that the dollar is front and center because of what Iran is doing by causing ruckus in the Strait of Hormuz, basically providing cover for the idea that those nation states are not willing to flow oil our way. The U.S. needs to now make sure they step up to be able to retrieve that same level of flow, i.e., while we got it Venezuela now. And so this leads to the next part of why, the transition away from the dollar based price mechanisms is inevitable because of this here. So I just showed you how we're down to zero from Saudi Arabia last month. It will not be just a 1 month thing, in my opinion. It'll be gradually increasing, but nowhere near what it used to be because the U.S. no longer needs it because the refiners find replacements in Venezuelan. And so literally that same level of oil, that 800,000 barrels per day that was coming from Saudi Arabia is now being made up by the 600,000 barrels that's coming from Venezuela. And it's good to say that's going to increase. And so you lose one, you gain another. So you can still tout the idea that, the dollar is still strong. Oh, really? It's just that we won't have the privilege of directly putting as much pressure on the Eastern Hemisphere, i.e. Saudi Arabia in particular. And that to me is a sign that, where will their loyalty lie if they're no longer dependent upon pricing their oil in USD terms? And so that leads to the next important point that goes right along with the idea that something has shifted when you have Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, and Turkey signing Mecca, the Mecca pact for mutual defense. So, here's the thing. All these Middle Eastern nations, who are their enemies? Other than just different factions, different ideologies, and different types of thought leadership amongst those Islamic nations. They're all Islamic, and they all believe that Allah or their Mahdi is coming soon. And so it's amazing that they can believe on the bigger picture in a sense, but they can't come together and agree on the smaller details until you get the need to defend yourself from some boogeyman out there. And so all three of these nations are buddy buddy with Russia, and Russia is supposed to be the enemy of the humanity, according to the US, and they all have deals with China. And so who exactly are they going to defend themselves from? I know the answer, and I'm assuming you know the answer as well. And so when you have these type of arrangements being made behind closed doors, they're not talking about this Mecca pact on Fox right now. Neither are they talking about some of the things that's happening with the oil situation. And I haven't even heard anything about Iran. We're supposed to have a deal concluded right now. Am I not mistaken? And so what happened with that deal? So clearly gold and silver, and they probably even our bond interest rates have sniffed out the manure from the narrative that is coming from our leadership. And so let me share with you. So this is when you see stuff like this is how you know that the world has changed. And the US has yet to fully accept that fact. So here is the actual signing of the Mecca pact. So you got the Turkish president signing his part. And then, of course, you got the prince, MBS, signing for his nation. And then you got the Pakistani nation signing for their people. And so, who are they defending themselves from? We're going to find out because there's a there's a there is a article out here that talks about if you attack one of those nations, you attack all three. And who's the only nation out here that's really attacking people? Unfortunately, but they attack people, as I said, because of the defense of the dollar. And so expect more dollar dumping amongst these three nation states here. And as a way of reinforcing their actions, that's why they're signing this pact to defend themselves. And so let me see if this is it here. It says, no, this is not the one I want to talk about. But I came across an article talking about this, saying that an attack against one is an attack against all. And so the US now is not going to have the same amount of allies as they had before, and they won't be able to outright defend or to protect their interests equally. So therefore, more nary, no more jawboning, more lies, more whatever, while the system still floats until it doesn't. And all along, the petrodollar is no longer going to be what it used to be. And we're still going to use dollars and even the digital representation of those dollars, whether it be EUSD, stablecoin USD. We all know by 2030, CBCDs will be here because that's why the Fed can't build it out until after 2030. So I say all this because the petrodollar is changing the world, and we're going to get more distractions and diversion tactics, as we always get. And it's all centered around the oil flow. And as of now, as a part of the preparations for this, let me share with you another graph that gives you the real-time oil pipeline status. And so this is what's happening in that Middle Eastern region and out east. And so at the very top, you see all this activity up here. This is the Russian oil flow and natural gas flow, and you name it, the crude oil, all this stuff coming from Russia. Russia is still operational. They got more than enough to last them for quite some time. And so the Middle Eastern region, as we can see here, let me zoom in here. So this is what we're looking at. So the red is offline, and that's the pipeline that goes across. And so what we're seeing, what is flowing from Saudi Arabia and through Saudi Arabia is the lower half here, and they're going out the other strait there. And then we have up top here, the pipeline going through Syria has been cut off for now. And everything to do on this side, we're not even knowledgeable what's taking place directly in Iran because this web source here doesn't have that type of intel. But what we can see is the pipeline that's on the southern side of Iran is still oil is still flowing, and of course the Strait of Hormuz is still open and and flowing. It's just not flowing in USD or to the west. And so here's the thing: If Saudi Arabia, their western their western flow through the Strait of Hormuz is not operational because of their beef with Iran. But if you still got oil flowing across your country and you can access the next strait over on the other side, outside of what Yemen is trying to do and the Houthis and everything like that. Let me give you more of what I'm talking about. Let me zoom in. And so I'm going to show you exactly. So here's the part that doesn't add up. If there's been zero oil flowing to the US, but yet oil is still flowing, and when it comes to Saudi Arabia, they still have oil flowing down this straight line here. And so where's that going? It's still flowing, but it didn't come to the US. Zero in July. And it's still flowing and they're still making money. They're just not making USD or not being forced to require their clients to pay them to invoice them solely in USD. So, when you still see stuff like this, when the oil's flowing, but it ain't flowing out west, it's hard to believe the Western Hemisphere's narrative because, they'll say that, the world still needs our currency, like Besson just said. And the new Venezuela now, because they're online, oh, sure, we can have that oil flow this way. And so this is more of what we're going to be hearing. And let me just zoom in here on Venezuela so we can see what is happening here. And so let me give you here. So as of now, there's no real activity above Venezuela. There's a little bit coming out the country next to them, Guyana. And so this is the Western Hemisphere of Venezuela. So yeah, so oil is flowing there. And it's good to say it's no longer flowing to China freely because the US now has captured the new Venezuela. So that's less oil going to China. But then again, that 800,000 barrel per day deficit that the US had with Saudi Arabia that is no longer flowing, where do you think it's flowing now? It's flowing east. In my opinion, it's going towards China. So China has a greater inventory, I'm sure, outside of what comes from Iran. So this is a shift in a power that, I'll put it together in a way where hopefully it makes sense because, it's going to be hard for our politicians to continue to not talk about these things. And one thing they will talk about is making sure that the US has the full support of their other ally. Israel's energy minister touts oil pipeline to bypass Hormuz. So, literally, 30 days ago, this information was given to us that since energy is not flowing as freely and as smoothly in USD terms, because the USD pricing mechanism benefits Israel because that's how, Israel makes money on the US. And so Israel now wants to get more involved in the energy game themselves. And that's why Gaza, amongst many other reasons, is so important. And so here we got Israel's energy minister touts oil pipeline to bypass Hormuz. Okay, sure. Let's hear what they're telling us, and then we'll filter through that. Gulf countries, dependent upon oil shipments from the Strait of Hormuz, could be significantly reduced by a pipeline linking to Gulf to Europe via Israel. Israel's energy minister said allowing them to allow also to bypass the Red Sea shipping industry. So this is Israel's way of still making sure that they are a part of the action. And so allowing a pipeline to go through Israel from other surrounding Israeli allies or bordering allies, which aren't many, and from Gaza intentionally into Europe so that Israel can be a part of the energy supply to Europe because Europe right now is in a tight spot because they're not outright supporting Trump and his agenda, i.e., the NATO idea of helping intervene in the Hormuz aspect. And so that's why there's still need of energy sources, and they can't outright run back to Russia, even though this upcoming winter they're going to be forced to make some decisions. And if they don't go back to Russia for natural gas, especially, it's going to be a cold winter in Europe again. But the whole point in this whole Israel pipeline, a lot of it is centered on around the fact that uh, it's the other reasons outside of what we're being told that Trump is so supportive of what Israel does and is hush hush from the mainstream media. And you see videos of what Palestine region looks like now, and it looks like it's been a global genocide of just the entire city structure is just gone. And that's why Trump has plans of the Board of Peace going to help rebuild out with all the private-public partnership deals, but a lot of it has to do with the fact that it's the shore, it's the gas. And so it says U.S. president has mostly focused on real estate vision of the new Riviera alongside the coastal enclave. There are also untapped offshore gas fields that Trump may be after. And not necessarily Trump, but obviously Israel is in need of those income streams so that they can run it through their pipelines to be able to supply Europe. And it's going to be priced in USD. It says on the land, Gaza Strip, there is nothing but destroyed homes. It says countless tons of rubble, agriculture, zero economic production. It says in its view, the aftermath of 15 months of war, 15 months at the time. Now you add additional 6 months on there, 21 months of war. These are matters that are no longer a concern of Donald Trump. And so Trump suddenly appears quite interested in Gaza, a small area devastated by Israeli war. Every time he has spoken about it in the past 2 weeks, this is back in February, he describes Gaza as an economic deal, speaking about it at the same manner he talks about Canada with its vast landmass and Greenland, the world's largest island. And so when you put all this together, it's a matter of the world shifting away from reliance and invoicing solely in USD, alternatives being put in place, such as the new Venezuela, and the idea that we now have replaced the 800,000 barrels per day with the 600,000 barrels plus that's coming from Venezuela. So we won't have a drop off of energy on top of what we already produce. And it's going to be something where it'll at least support our energy needs in the short term. But however, our deficit spending as well as our currency debasement is only going to continue, and our indebtedness to the world will remain because the very bedrock and foundation of the system is debt. And so if you got other nations no longer being forced to hold our liabilities, i.e. bonds and treasuries, short and long, and no longer have to invoice other nation states in USD solely for receivement of payment, that's going to be more nations deciding to lessen their need to hold dollars. And that right there will pick things up as far as while we see inflationary pressures remaining, because if the world is priced in USD debt, every nation has some for the most part. What are they going to do? How are they going to service that debt unless they take in dollars to do such? Or China, on the other side of the equation, they've opened up a debt swapping mechanism where they have literally decided to redeem some of the U.S. liabilities that nation states have, like a coupon. So what am I talking about? Let me see if I can find an article real quick to explain to you what's going on. China has opened up a currency exchange swap line with other heavily indebted U.S. nations. And what they've done is made it available so that nations can swap their U.S. debt for Chinese debt. And it'll help relieve some of the financial burdens placed on those countries, which is predominantly Africa. So here is what I'm talking about. This is from 2024. It says China unveils massive debt swap to save local governments as it eyes trade fight with Trump. And so basically what it boils down to is whatever you have in USD liabilities, short-term, long-term debt, currency, whatever, we'll buy that from you and give you yuan to service that debt. And then you're more and less dependent upon the U.S. debt entrapment, because now we'll give you lower interest rates. We'll give you everything you need to make the debt burden less burdensome for your nation state, and you won't have to answer to the U.S. as much. That's kind of what this deal here does. So with all that being said, you can see how the U.S. dollar supremacy is no longer what it used to be. And as a result of that, the U.S. will cause more of a ruckus. And if anybody ever thought that there would be peace in the Middle East, nevertheless, peace with Iran, you got another thing coming. Because for those who coming in late, I played a video highlighting the primary focus of why our government does what it does, and has everything to do with the idea of keeping the dollar front and center. At the same time, nation states have already opted out of solely accepting them. And so when more nation states dump that puts more pressure on our economy because once again, if we don't have buyers of our debt, that means our auctions will go basically null and void. We're gonna have horrible auctions that come out every day, every weekday auction is something. At the same time, we owe close to $10 trillion that's due by next year. So where do we get those funds to refinance that debt? If you don't have borrowers, and you definitely don't have growth, then what do you do? That's where we're going to find out what the next phase of this global fiasco will be. All along, Donald Trump is going to be doing press conferences saying stuff like, our economy is doing great. It couldn't have been better. Like the jobs data. Oh, look at the jobs data. I mean, we're getting Biden type figures. Look at this. This is something from Zero Hedge. It says, this is how you know it's bad when they say the Biden admin tricks are back. And so for those that were around 2-3 years ago, I was talking about, man, they revised and redefined all definitions under Biden regime. And the whole point in having Biden installed was to destroy the economy so bad that anything Trump would do opposite of that would look like the economy's being saved. But actually, it hasn't improved overall one bit. I got many ways of proving that there is no golden age other than just look at your 401ks. But here we got the same bogus figures of revision after the fact. And so literally, you look back at 2024, at this side right here, you had look at all that blue, and look how big them bars are up top. Phenomenal numbers under Biden. He had the strongest economy the world's ever seen. And then the next month after, you get the red. They revised them all down substantially. And then we get Donald Trump in during this middle phase, and the numbers are like, oh no, he ran on, Biden's economy was so bad, it was just horrible. I inherited a horrible. Sure, you did, sure, but what you doing to make it no better? And so literally, from this point on, we got the Trump era, and so still got a lot of red. So all of Trump's last year figures, as you can see here in the red. So literally, so this is the start. So from right here, where my fingers point at, this is the start of Donald Trump's presidency. And he has just as much red revisions to his fake numbers as the president did before him. And so here we are now, where everything we see on this side, this is all Donald. And these artificial surges that you see on the far end, they're all going to be revised down, starting with what's encircled right here. So how great is the economy really? If you look at, the actual data points, and that's why any figures come from the government, CPI, PCE, Fed, I mean, any data point, IC, manufacturing, you name it, they're all lies. Because what government, in the midst of what's happening to them from other nation states dealing with their debt and their currencies, would actually come out and tell the truth that the economy is just barely hanging on? But it's only barely hanging on for the average consumer that don't know what's really happening and not positioned ahead of time. Because if you're in Trump's inner circle and you're part of the billionaire club, you couldn't be be doing better. Like, there's been more billionaires created over the last year plus than any time in human history. So if you in the game, you doing good. And so for most people who are tuned in to me here, I know for a fact that you're better off than the majority because you're smart enough and wise enough to be more proactive with your educational journey, to where you listen to this channel on top of your other favorite content creators to give you an alternative perspective on what the mainstream media can't tell you. And as a result of that alone, your information allows you to make better decisions. So I know that you're better off than the majority. It's just the other people who still watch Fox, CNN, MSNBC daily. Those are the ones that are being deceived massively. That's just my opinion. Could be wrong, but okay. So, man, that's a lot of stuff there. So let me just check in the chat real quick and see. Uh, it won't matter who gets called, who gets elected, right? At this point, everybody know. You don't get to the point of being elected unless you're first selected by APAC or by whatever other, special interest group, period. And then it says, I hear that the feds are buying Japan's yen and dollars. Not how does this work? If Japan has loaned US money in the past, so confusing. Bobby, great point there. So just hearing that statement there, my first thought would be uh, some type of emergency window where it's a short term, it's offered as a short term relief option where you can give us some liabilities, and we'll give you our asset, which is our currency. So you park you park some of your debt with us, same like the whole banking contagion that took place in 2022. Create a window or use a window. There's so many windows that are available for people to use to get interbank help. So you take some US liabilities, some of our treasuries, you can low key use them as collateral to get a loan. So if Japan is sitting on $1.2 trillion worth of US debt, what I wouldn't be surprised if what Scott Bessent does with our Federal Reserve say, hey, you're sitting on 1.2. Let's refinance that. You give us, we'll start small. Give us $100 billion worth of our debt to you, and we'll give you a credit line of $100,000 and some type of smooth agreement where it won't come back to bite you in the butt. It'll help you get through this. It'll help things stabilize. And because we control all this, we'll talk about the details after the fact. Let's just get you through this chaos so that the bond vigilantes don't come out and really wreak havoc. And so literally that's what I believe would be in play. Don't know this, but based upon all the other events I've been covering, that just seems to happen. If you see a problem brewing, you can't put it out right away. You create another exit option that allow people to get support from you. So the Federal Reserve has to support every central bank that has anything to do with our US liabilities, which is every one of them. Hence the idea of other central banks deciding to lessen their exposure to US liabilities and increase their exposure to gold. It's like you got to let go of the bad habits in your life, and you got to take on some new good habits. And that's how gold is being pushed back up. And that's how I would see that playing out. And Tommy, it says, buy the truth and sell it not. Also, wisdom and instruction and understanding. 100%. And so ultimately, what I'm intending to do with this is to provide information that, if acted upon, can be considered wisdom, which will help increase your knowledge base that will allow you to have better understanding of what's taking place on your behalf, whether you believe in it or not. It doesn't matter. You're not left out of this entire experiment we're having called life. And then with that wisdom and the understanding should give you greater knowledge to then make better choices. And that's why, because I'm talking solely right now about monetary and financial issues, it's all encompassed in the spiritual essence of our existence. Because I'm sure at this current moment, if you're a believer in, Christ and a devout follower, you're experiencing an intense increase in your spirit, that things are taking place now where I'm sensing this and I'm noticing is that more believers in Christ are being instructed, and they're having more of a yearning and a tug on their heart to be more vocal about their faith, because that's what the entire window of grace is for, is to increase the size of the body of Christ, because at some point the body of Christ will be removed when grace ends, and then the wrath must be poured out. And so it's getting as many people into the body as possible by drawing them and leading them to salvation through Christ alone. And the way I would like to say I do it is give you numbers, give you the stats and the facts, but then always wrap it up by saying, if you don't have Christ, none of this is of importance, because when you leave, your next destination is where you're going to be the most invested in at, whether it's, you know, you know, where there'll be weeping and gnashing of teeth, or there will be a more paradise type of experience. But that's just my belief. But anyway, I can go on and on and on, but I'm not. I just have fun sharing information that I think is relevant to you, because it is relevant to me, because every day we all get up and go do something for this little thing right here. Let me just see if I can prop this up. Everybody does something, whether you have a lot of them or little amount, is what you do is just one single dollar that can start you in a different direction. And that's what my whole point in rethinking the dollar is. Not all dollars are created equal. So you got this dollar, as I always say, and you got this dollar. You need this to spend bills and to take care of immediate needs, but you're gonna need this one to protect yourself from this as time moves forward. And so, with that being the case, that is what it is. But okay, my good friends. Anyway, yeah, this has been a lot. I'm giving you more than enough to consider. Hopefully, it's of value. If you have found it of value, this is the chance where you are able to support the channel and hit that thumbs up button. Show your support, subscribe for whatever it's worth. You might get notified, you might not. But if you're watching a replay, take any segment that makes sense to you, that resonates with you, capture it and share it with the family and friends so they can be understood. Because now that you know more, you're responsible for those that are closest to you, whether you want to admit it or not. And it's gonna hurt when you see people around you sinking if you're not sinking as fast or nowhere near as where they're sinking, and they look up at you like, man, you can say, I try to tell you, but once again, it's God's mercy and grace is everlasting because he know we some knuckleheads, boy. And I'm grateful that people didn't give up on me, especially when it came to my faith. So anyway, that's just my little testimony. But love, live, learn, laugh, and we'll go from there. But other than that, people, be blessed.